bring this meeting to order for October 20th, regular, the full authority agenda, full authority board meeting for October 20th. Board members, staff, guests, and members of the public are reminded that a full authority board meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the authority's website along with official written minutes. As such, comments and opinions expressed may be published, and any comments expressed by individual board members, guests, and general public are their own and do not represent the opinions, comments of the full authority and or Kettle Creek Board of Directors. Recorded video of the full authority meeting is not considered the official record of that meeting. The official record of the full authority meeting shall consist solely of the minutes approved by the full authority. I'll ask for any declarations of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, you want to give a roll call, Elizabeth?
Kravitz. Dennis Kravitz, if you can just say aye. Jaguar.
Yes, present. Sorry, I have a bad connection.
Harvey.
Here.
Herbert.
Present.
Jones.
Here.
Mackey.
Here.
Peters.
Here.
Pelosa.
Here.
Warwick.
Here.
Winfield.
Here.
And Mr. Chair, I see Mr. Kravitz is just returning to audio.
Okay.
Dennis Kravitz, are you here with us?
Yes, I am now. Thank you. Sorry.
Mr. Chair, all 10 members are present.
Thank you. So move down to minutes, approval for the September 15th full authority meeting. Any errors or omissions? And I guess we'll all do collectively. So October 6th executive committee meeting as well. Any questions and concerns?
I'll move them, Herbert.
Herbert moves. Seconder?
Winfield.
Winfield. Any further discussion? We'll call a vote, please, Elizabeth.
Kravitz.
Yes.
Jaguar.
Yes.
Harvey.
Yes.
Herbert.
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
Peters. Peters. Steve Peters.
Yes, yes, sorry.
That's okay. Pelosa.
Yes.
Warwick.
Yes.
Winfield.
Yes.
And Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Move down to matters arising. First reports from Betsy, the media report. Go ahead, Betsy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a sampling of social media over the past month. The post with the highest reach was our LDD moth post, which is formerly known as the gypsy moth, reached over 7,000 people. So people continue to be interested about that. We had a couple of volunteers that brought some recovered turtles back to the area by plane, which is kind of neat. Next slide. We did a number of posts and releases as well about flood events. And these posts just showcased, we did 2 schoolyard tree planting events over the last month in St. Thomas, one at Elgin Court and one at Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
Okay,
Question?
thanks, Go ahead, Jen.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Betsy, what is the survival rate of all those turtles? Do they all survive, or are you down to maybe 20 or 30 by the end of the winter?
I'll redirect that to Jen.
To Jim, it's from the research that I've looked at, the survival rate is about 1%.
Oh,
and
really?
Since snapping turtles are a long-lived species, they don't actually get to sexual maturity until they're about 15 to 20 years old. So every death of an adult turtle sets that population back quite a bit. The snapping turtle clutches can be anywhere between 30 and 60 eggs. And if you have 100 eggs, you might get one that makes it to sexual maturity.
So do they just die naturally, or is there something that eats them?
Oh, everything eats them.
Okay, I just wondered what happened to them all. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Any
You're
other
welcome.
questions for Betsy? Just wondering, when did the name change for the gypsy moth? And what was the reason? Or gypsy moth is just a slang term for them?
Maybe Jeff can provide some information on that.
I don't know.
Thanks. I don't know when the name actually formally changed. I noticed I did report back to council back in the spring. And most information I had still referred to it as the gypsy moth, but over the course of the summer, I noticed it had changed to LDD. So at some point in time, and I can only guess at the reasoning, maybe a slang term or something of that nature that was offensive possibly.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, we'll
Pete?
move down to, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, sorry, we're still dealing with all these consent item reports?
Matters arising.
I just had a question on the one slide dealing with rainfall totals. And there were a couple reporting sites there that I didn't know what they were. Coco RH5 and Weather Underground. What are those sites that we monitor for rainfall totals?
Well, Steve, we'll get down to that.
Oh, okay, sorry, I thought we were dealing with them all right now. Thanks.
So we'll move down to B, project tracking, Elizabeth. And
Sure,
Go
it's been another busy month, Mr. Chair. The camp grounds closed for the season on September 30th. We've been working on gathering the intents to camp from our seasonal campers for 2022. We also submitted an application to the Ontario Trillium Foundation's community build for 3 docks out at Lake Whitaker. And if we're successful in that application, this would be great for increased recreation and accessibility out at the lake. We've done some reporting for the Elgin Clean Water Program review. Six projects were approved recently, totaling $15,000 in grants. Betsy and Jeff have done some additional naturalization around the shoreline of Lake Margaret in cooperation with the city. And we just yesterday did a presentation to the Laternal webinar about reimagining CA lands for the future. And we were able to showcase the Evan Sister Water Trail and the new Arts Tree and Trail in St. Thomas to over 150 participants throughout Ontario. So that was a great opportunity for staff to showcase some of the things that we're doing locally at our CA.
thanks, Elizabeth. Any questions? If not, we'll move down to watershed conditions. Jennifer, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've received a lot of rain in the last few weeks, as I'm sure everyone has experienced. Water levels are definitely fluctuating with those rain events. Lake Erie is continuing its seasonal decline, which is nice, although it is approaching levels that we saw at this time in 2019, but it's still lower than the highs. Staff released several high water related media releases, flood outlook, and then a flood watch at the end of September. That flood event can be viewed in detail in the weather event fact sheet. And as well, some ongoing projects that we're doing with the Dalewood Dam are moving along. We were able to remove some trees along the berm, which is something that we've been looking forward to getting completed. And you can see how the before and after on that slide. Oh, and you wanted to know about the different types of rain data in the weather event fact sheet. So One of the nice things that we have access to is a big online weather watcher volunteer system. So Kettle Creek has its own rain gauges that we're able to collect rain data from, but there's a whole slew of people in Ontario and across Canada that collect weather data using their own weather system. So the Weather Underground is an online weather watcher system where people with high-tech equipment of their own post their own weather data onto that system. And CocoRAS, which is the Community Collaborative Rain and Hail and Snow Network, is a grassroots group of weather watchers that started in the US and the Midwest and has spread across the US and Canada and in some places in the Caribbean. And they collect data using a very manual standard rain gauges that's uploaded to a website where that data can be used as well. It's a great system to get extra coverage for the rain data in the watershed to fill those data gaps. So that's where that data has come from.
Any further questions for Jen? If not, we'll move down to item D, Conservation Ontario update from Elizabeth.
Yes, Mr. Chair, the chair and I attended the virtual Conservation Ontario meeting held on September 27th, 2021. And I just wanted to update the board members primarily on that the operating budget was approved, but it actually results in an overall decrease to KCCA's levy to Conservation Ontario by about $439, which is good news. Conservation Ontario, I think, is trying to build budgets that are very responsive to what's happening locally.
Questions? Seeing none, we'll move down to correspondence. We have a
Actually, Mr.
couple,
Chair, if we can have a motion to
sure,
receive
yes.
those reports from A to D.
Yep.
Peters,
Mackey moved.
Mackey, Peters and Mackey. Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Krebitz,
Yes.
Jaguar,
Yes.
Harvey, Stephen Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick, I acknowledge that Allison is nodding. Wayne Winfield. Ralph
You mean
Winfield,
Ralph?
sorry.
Yes.
Yes, Ralph Winfield. Grant Jones,
Yes,
and that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. Now we'll move down to correspondence. First two items are just letters sent from Conservation Ontario to our new Minister of Environment and Conservation Parks. And any questions or concerns to Elizabeth? About that letter, two letters? Seeing none, we have a recommendation the correspondence be received. Mover and seconder, please.
I would move. Ralph.
Rabbit second.
Kravitz. Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Krebitz,
Yes.
Jaguar,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick. Allison, I don't know what's happening with your audio. Can you just raise your hand? I acknowledge your hand raised. Ralph Winfield,
Yes.
Grant Jones,
Yes,
and that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. We'll move down to statement of revenue and expense. Anything to comment on there, Elizabeth?
Mr. Chair, I don't have a comment. I'm pleased with how things are going so far this year. You can see The revenue from Lake Whitaker and Dalewood is up. We had budgeted for about an 80% of normal revenue, and we've exceeded that, which is good news for the campgrounds and the overall status of the authority at this time.
Questions? Seeing no questions, we'll move down to new business. First item. Oh,
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if I could just have a motion to accept those statements.
Sure. Mover, seconder. Herbert,
Herbert moved it.
seconder, please.
Winfield.
Harvey.
We'll go with Harvey this time, Ralph.
Okay, no problem.
Kravitz,
yes,
Jaguar,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes,
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
yes,
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick.
Yes, and I fixed my earphones.
Thank you. Winfield,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes,
and that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. Move down to new business. First item, administrative bylaw amendments, and we have 3 of them today. We'll start with the first one. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Sure, Mr. Chair. This is updates to your administrative bylaws, and it's reflecting those earlier adjustments that were made as a result of the changes to the Conservation Authorities Act. So we've kind of reviewed those changes before. This is just bringing the changes into the administrative bylaws, so they're reflected there. Just to highlight some of the changes, you'll recall Section 14 dealt with municipal appointments, so that 70% rule is now acknowledged in the administrative bylaws, where 70% of the member municipalities' appointments to the CA must be councillors. It also reflects that the minister can appoint an agricultural rep if he or she so chose. It also reflects the 1-year term now for the chair and vice chair, and the succession planning that a different municipality, the new chair coming into that role can't be the same municipality as the exiting chair or vice chair. The powers of the authority are now updated in the administrative bylaw to reflect what is now in the Act. And we also added verbiage around an annual audit, which we always do already, but it's now reflected in the administrative bylaw as well. So those changes were tracked in red in the advanced package, and I'm simply asking the recommendation is that those amendments be accepted and approved in the administrative bylaw.
Pelosa moves.
Seconder.
Warwick?
All right. Any questions or concerns before we vote?
Just one question. Who's going to appoint this agricultural representative? Is it going to be a separate entity, or is it come as part of one of the municipalities?
No, it would, Mr. Chair, my understanding it would be a separate entity, and it's only at the direction of the minister if he wanted to enact that. So it's not a requirement that every CA has this at this point. It's just if the minister so chooses to make that appointment to any one CA.
Okay.
Any further questions? We have a mover and a seconder. Call vote, please, Elizabeth.
Kravitz,
yes,
Jaguar,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
yes,
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
yes,
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes,
Mr. Chair, that motion passes.
thank you. We move to our second bylaw update, and Joe's going to speak to this one. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to you. Some recent changes under Bill 229, Protect, Support, and Recovery from COVID-19 Act. This legislation has created a new section under the Conservation Authorities Act related to municipal zoning orders. So municipal zoning order is a development or a land use approval that's been issued by the province. Under that order, if the lands are affected by Conservation Authority regulations, the proponents are still required to apply and obtain necessary permits. But under a provincial approval or an MZO order, the authority doesn't have the ability to deny. So under this section, permits would have to be issued, but the board would have the ability to impose conditions on those permits. So as a result of that, it requires some changes to our hearing guidelines, as the role of the hearing board would change for applications submitted under that new section. Primarily that the board would not be considering whether to issue a permit or to deny it, but rather considering conditions that would be imposed on those permits. So we require updates to our hearing guidelines to reflect those changes to applications specifically submitted under that new section. And secondly, the approval of Bill 245, Accelerating Access to Justice Act. They combined a bunch of appeal tribunals within the province, which included the Mining and Lands Tribunal, which originally was the appeal tribunal for decisions under the Conservation Authorities Act. They consolidated them all to one Ontario Land Tribunal. So that update in our guidelines would simply be a housekeeping to reflect the new appeal authority for decisions under the Conservation Authorities Act. So in your advanced package was a copy of our hearing guidelines with the recommended updates. Those updates are consistent with recommendations of Conservation Ontario to provide consistent hearing guidelines across the province. Just looking for the board to approve the updates as presented.
Okay, any questions for Joe?
Peters,
Peters moves, or Peter has a question.
well, I'm happy to move it as well too, just to get it on the floor.
Go ahead, Steve.
No, thanks. It's more of a comment, Mr. Chair. I've been involved in provincial politics, or had been involved for 12 years, and I have never seen more ministerial zoning orders issued by a government than we have seen in the past 2.5 years. It's just unprecedented how these MZOs are overriding local decision-making process. And, I hope that this isn't a trend that's going to continue. I don't like the fact that, we're dealing with a couple controversial planning issues in the city of St. Thomas right now, and an outside elected body is going to ultimately make a decision that will probably, well, I won't second guess, but could potentially override the local decision-making process. And this unprecedented use of MZOs is another area of real concern. But I realize that there's nothing we're going to do about it, but it's just something that concerns me.
I think that one concerns us all, Steve. But yes, point well taken. Any other questions or concerns?
Yeah, I've got my hand up there.
Oh,
Grant.
sorry.
It's okay. I just, while we're talking about it, I just want to throw it out there. I just want to get the feeling, like when we see the local planning appeal tribunal and everything merged together, does anybody have a crystal ball to see if this is going to be something that's a positive step or a negative step, or something that'll just stay status quo? And anybody who feels they might be able to answer that, I'd welcome the answer.
Well, from my perspective, and Southwold will probably be going down that road with a planning decision, and the backlog for the LPAT was over a year, like a year and a half. From my perspective, from staff's perspective, is how can they actually, when you combine all these different tribunals together, it's just going to make a even bigger backlog unless they're convening every day, 8 hours a day, which I don't think, Elizabeth, have you heard how they're going to manage that? Or I know our staff haven't.
No, I haven't heard anything to that effect.
I guess time will tell. So there's no further questions. Have a mover and seconder, please. I guess Steve already moved.
I have a mover of Steve Peters waiting for a seconder.
Warwick.
I'll second it.
Call a vote, please, Elizabeth.
Kravitz,
Yes.
Giguere,
Yes.
Harvey, Stephen Harvey,
Yes.
Jim Herbert,
Yes.
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes. The motion carries. So we'll go down to our next amendment, Conservation Authorities Act regulations. Elizabeth?
Actually, Mr. Chair, I don't know if there's a problem with the agenda, but my intention was that the next item was budget 2022.
Okay. Right, I had an item C in here for some reason, but,
Sorry, that's a mistake on my end.
okay, no problem. We'll go down to budget 2022. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chair, if we can do the budget, and then I think in the PowerPoint presentation, the Conservation Authorities Act regulation comes after in the slides.
Okay.
So I'll move to the budget 2022, which is item D, and then move back up to the Conservation Authorities Act. Sorry for that confusion.
Yeah, no problem.
So in terms of budget 2022, staff have been working on updating their strategic work plans. We've updated them with the successes that we've had so far based on what we were attempting to accomplish over those that period and projections for what we hope to accomplish or what budget needs will be for 2022. Staff are still proceeding with generating a draft budget for your review in November with a 3% general levy increase. There's lots of pressures that we are dealing with. Salary and benefits is one of them. The CPI continued to increase and was as high as 4.1% in August. Insurance projections, which I spoke to in the advanced report, our insurance provider, is putting us on notice to at least budget for a 15 to 25% increase, and that was explained in the advanced package through a memo from them. Software costs are something that we're trying to build into the budget next year as well, including annual license fees rather than standalone. This seems to, annual license fees provides better security for the software that we are using. I'm also investigating an onboard portal for board members. This will allow us to streamline our board packages, and again, will make it more efficient in terms of continuing with or setting up hybrid models where some members are joining virtually and other members are joining in person. And we're looking at the necessary deliverables that we'll need to do as a result of the Conservation Authority Act updates to ensure compliance with that with the least impact to the municipal levy. In terms of the revenue sides of it, we're building back up after, hopefully after the pandemic, and planning for the campgrounds to be at 100% capacity. We'll present a full report on projected increases to fees for the campgrounds in the November board meeting. And we're also looking at an increase in the cost of seedlings to help support the tree planting program, moving those up from 25 cents to 35 cents. The next step in the draft budget process, I have included the strategic work plans with projections for 2022. I would invite feedback from the board of directors on those strategic work plans by November 3rd. If you have any questions or concerns where staff is heading in any one of those departments, I would certainly invite feedback from you on that so that I can build that in with the goal of making that draft budget presentation at our November full authority meeting.
Hey, any questions for Elizabeth?
Mr. Chair, it's
You're
me.
lucky. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Just a question on the software. Do you know if there's an opportunity to join, or maybe through Conservation Ontario, for licenses with other conservation authorities where we could have a like, joint purchasing and perhaps get a better deal?
Mr. Chair, that's exactly what we're doing with Onboard. I had begun to look at it individually as CA and then presented it up to Conservation Ontario, which they've undertaken it. And just last week, we were presented with a joint proposal from that service provider about coming together as a collective to get a better price. So that's definitely one where we've come together as a collective for a better price. And similarly with some of the GIS software that we use, Conservation Ontario is looking at a joint licensing for that. So definitely cost savings there.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Need a motion to receive, Elizabeth, or?
Yeah, just a motion to receive for information at this time.
Herbert, to receive.
Herbert?
Winfield,
Seconder, please. Winfield? And call the vote, please.
Winfield.
Elizabeth?
Krebitz,
Yes.
Jaguar,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
yes.
and Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. We'll do the Conservation Authorities Act now.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chair.
That's great.
So the phase 1 regulations for the Conservation Authorities Act were released on October 7th. There was 3 regulations that were released at this time, all as a result of that phase 1 consultation that happened earlier this year. So the 3 regulations that were released detailed the mandatory programs and services. Then there was another one that detailed the transition plans and the agreements regulation. And the third and final one was released in the rules of conduct and conservation authority regulations. In total, throughout the consultation period, there was about 444 comments received by their government on that consultation process. So good engagement, I think, there. Overall, the government has said that the feedback generally supported the work of CAs, especially in regards to our hazards program, and valued the value of CA lands, both for the protection and recreational use that the province's population gets from those. There is also general support to improve transparency, governance, and oversight of the CAs. And general support to increase funding to CAs as well. Next slide. So just to detail each one of those regulations that was released. So the mandatory programs and services. So if you remember, mandatory programs and services are what we can levy to our member municipalities without an agreement in place. So quite similar to what we do now. Changes in terms of what I had previously reported or what was included in that consultation guide is that the community advisory boards are no longer mandatory. So if you recall, we were going to be required to have basically a separate board from the board that you serve on now that looked at community representatives. Well, though that is still available to each CA to set up, it's now based on what we feel is our local need and is no longer a mandatory requirement. The other thing that was added was low maintenance passive recreation was added or recognized as a mandatory service. I think this should be seen as a positive or a win out of the consultation. I think there was recognition that specifically for some areas, trails or other services that can be provided without staff add to the security of the property and the overall enjoyment of the property for the population. And so that was good to see that come out of the consultation. Land stewardship and tree planting were included as mandatory programs and services, although there was a push for that. But the government does note that those types of services, so stewardship and tree planting, can still be allowed, but it would need a municipal agreement or self-generated revenue to continue with the support of the local CA. That low water response and ice management remain as mandatory services. And you also see that the core watershed-based resource management strategy is included as a mandatory program and service as well. Next slide. So of the mandatory programs and services, there's 6 deliverables that need to be completed and in place by December 31st, 2024. And those I've listed on that chart beside on the chart on the screen. So those include the ice management plans, if the authority feels that that is necessary locally, the natural hazard infrastructure operational management plans, asset management plans, a conservation area strategy, a land inventory, and watershed-based resource management strategy all need to be in place by December 31st, 2024. All the other mandatory programs and services are to be in place by January 1st, 2024. So there is a little bit more or some flexibility built in now to meeting those deliverables, but the mandatory strategies may cause increased levy and definitely staffing pressures to meet those deadlines by 2024. And that's what staff are working on right now, is to dig in to those regulations and pick out basically what we have and what we will need to have in place and the resources that we'll need to have in place to make it happen by December 31st, 2024. Next slide. The second regulation had to deal with basically timelines and agreements. And you can see I've tried to pick out the key dates for you on this screen. So by December 31st, that should say 2021. So by the end of this year, we need to have a transition plan worked out and presented to each municipality. A copy should be sent to the ministry and posted to the Conservation Authority's website. And that's basically just a plan, again, with deadlines and targets of how we see this rolling out to meet the deadlines that are in the regulation. By February 28, 2022, we're supposed to have that inventory of programs and services out to our member municipalities. And again, the regulation sets out in more detail what that programs and services listing should include. And some of those are basically the funding source for each one of those programs and services and the estimated annual cost to each one of those programs. And it speaks to basically using a 3-year average to basically, again, target the costs for the member municipalities. So previously in the consultation, that was, I believe, supposed to be out by the end of this year. So there's a little bit of additional time to get that in place and have it out by February 28, 2022. And then there's a system of quarterly reporting that we'll have to do to the ministry throughout this transition period, and highlighting some progress reports and status of agreement negotiations throughout 2022 and 2023. Again, with basically the target of January 1st, 2024, of having all the MOUs and agreements in place for all the non-mandatory programs and services requiring municipal levy. And the last slide. And then the last regulation really dealt with the rules of conduct in conservation areas. And this regulation consolidates all the Conservation Authority Section 29 regulations.
How you doing? What's up?
So previously,
Okay.
I'm sorry, someone's mic is on and they should be muted. Just a reminder to mute. This regulation, previously each CA had their own basically Section 29 regulation, which stipulated what could happen on conservation areas. what this one does is just consolidates it into one section 29. And again, there wasn't really a lot of concern amongst CAs to have that happen. I think it makes sense. And it just basically stipulates what can happen on CA-owned lands for public safety and to protect the resources on the land and public investment. The timeline for this regulation to come in force is to be determined, but will be enacted at the same time as the new Section 28 regulation, which has yet to be released. So at this time, this is basically put forward for the information of members. As I said, it came out October 6th. Staff are kind of working through it and looking at that transition plan, and with the aim to get it back, plan back to you for consideration in November and roll out to the member municipalities in December.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. Any questions? It's nice to see we've got a little bit of breathing room on some of these issues. It's going to take a little bit off the Elizabeth's plate, short term anyway. Seeing no questions, a motion to receive and file.
Mackey.
I think that was a Mackey and Warwick.
Yeah.
Krebitz?
Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Sorry, Krebitz?
Yes.
Jaguar?
Yes.
Harvey?
Yes.
Herbert?
Yes.
Mackey?
Yes.
Peters?
Yes.
Pelosa?
Yes.
Warwick?
Yes.
Winfield?
Yes.
And Jones?
Yes,
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. Move down to item planning regulation activity report from Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just once again, providing a summary of planning and regulation activity of staff since the last meeting, looking for receipt of this information based on the advanced package report. And I'm happy to answer any questions if the members have any.
Questions for Joe? Seeing no questions, recommendations before you. Mover and seconder, please.
Krebitz.
Peters.
Both Peters. Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Krebitz?
Yes.
Jaguar?
Yes.
Harvey?
Yes.
Herbert?
Yes.
Mackey?
Yes.
Peters?
Yes.
Pelosa?
Yes.
Warwick?
Yes.
Winfield?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes,
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
okay. I think that brings us to closed session.
Mr. Chair, if I may, there's one addition to the closed session. I'd like to add a property matter about a possible acquisition to the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Is that okay with everybody? You don't see anybody saying no. So motion to go into closed session for 4 items, 2 personnel matters and 2 property matters.
Pelosa moves.
Pelosa, seconder.
Harvey?
Harvey,
So we just stay on, don't have to close out and resume?
correct.
That's
Thank you.
correct.
Thank you.
So on the motion to go in closed at 10:45, Krebitz,
Yes.
Jaguar,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes,
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, the first motion that we would need is for the passing of the minutes, both for the September full authority and the October executive.
you mover and
Pelosa?
seconder. Pelosa. Seconder,
Mackey?
Mackey. Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Krebitz,
Yes.
Jaguar,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
yes,
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, then item A, personnel matter, that staff be directed.
That staff proceed as directed.
Proceed as directed. Yes, correct. Mover and seconder, please.
I'll so move. Ralph?
Seconder,
Peters,
Peters. Call the vote, please.
Cravitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Herbert,
yes,
Jones,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
yes,
Winfield.
Yes.
That motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and then item B, personnel matter, that staff proceed as directed.
Kravitz moves.
Warwick second,
Warwick. Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Cravitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Herbert,
yes,
Jones,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
yes,
Winfield.
Yes.
That motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and item C, property matter, that staff proceed as directed.
Mackey.
Peters.
Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Cravitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Herbert,
yes,
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
yes,
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes. And finally, item D, another property matter, that staff proceed as directed. Mover and seconder, please.
Jiguer.
I'll move it.
You got Jiguer and Herbert.
Thank you.
Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Cravitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes,
Jones,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
yes,
Winfield.
Yes.
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And upcoming meetings, we have a scheduled November 17th, full authority meeting, but because of staff timing, staff is asking it to be moved to the 24th. And I think I have consensus that that is okay with everybody's schedule. So do we need a motion to that effect? Elizabeth?
I think as long as we have consensus, we're
Consensus,
fine,
okay.
unless a member
Right.
wants a motion.
No, I don't believe so. We're just double checking. Okay, if there's nothing else, motion to adjourn. Warwick, put your hand up real quick. Seconder,
Herbert,
Herbert seconds. I think everybody's in favor of that, so have a great rest of the week, guys.